Do it. All right. So yes, good morning, everyone. My name is Jesse, and I am with Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. For those joining us for the first time, we are all about bringing conservation, adventure, and science into classrooms around the world. It's been a really exciting month of September to kick off our new year, highlighting ocean plastics as an issue, something that you guys can take action on. We've got a really neat presentation today, so you guys can get excited for that. Right now, we've got 6 classes joining us from across North America, so I want to give them a chance to say hi and do a shout out. So we've got Miss Baratti's grade 6s in Festus in Missouri. Hi, guys.
Hi.
Hey. All right. We've got Miss Skinner's grade 4s in Austin in Texas. Hi, guys.
Hi.
Awesome. All right. We've got Miss Lovin's grade 4-5s in Sherwood in Arkansas. Hey, guys. Hey. Oh. Mic off, mic off. They're there, and they're excited, hopefully. We've got Miss Reed, grade 4s in Leamington, Ontario, coming in from a French class. Oh, they are here. Good. Awesome. Hi, guys. Hey, they skipped French for this. Bilingualism in Canada is having a problem just because of this session, so we're very excited for that. Thank you guys for making that happen. We've got Mr. Allen's grade 6s in Brampton, Ontario. Hey, guys. Hey, it looks like they got stuff working too. Way to go. Good. All the tech's working today. It's very exciting. All right. And then last but not least, we've got Miss Gill's 5-6s in Cambridge, Ontario. Hey, awesome. Of course, the reason you guys are all here today is for our speaker. So we are joined live by Anna Robuck, and she is joining us from Rhode Island on the East Coast of the United States. So she is a noted young, amazing researcher and science communicator. She does a great deal of work to not only study how pollutants get in birds and how they affect them, but she disseminates that information. She makes sure that people like you know all about it, which is super important today. So we're really excited to have her join us, and she's going to take us through a seabird dissection today, which we are really excited to see. So without further ado, thank you so much for joining us, Anna, and take it away.
Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to chat with you all today. I'm going to get started and just share a few slides, and then we're going to dive into a necropsy, and that's what scientists call a dissection of a large vertebrate animal. And so let me share my screen with you. Okay, great. Can everyone see a PowerPoint? It says plastics and seabirds.
We got your big slide on the right and your slide deck on, there we go, fills the whole screen, perfect.
Awesome, great. Okay, so I study pollutants in seabirds. And when I say pollutants, I mean things that are visible and invisible. So I look at different chemicals that can get into seabirds that humans create. And then I also look at plastics. And the plastics project got started because I was looking for some different chemicals in seabirds, but every single bird that I was cutting up to take samples from, I found plastics from. And so I realized that I also needed to start researching this question. So as Jesse mentioned, I am a PhD student in Rhode Island. I have a little outline of where that is if you're not familiar. It's a tiny state on the US East Coast, and I'm at the Graduate School of Oceanography here in Rhode Island. And I study both chemistry and seabirds. And I want to know what chemicals get into seabirds because seabirds are a really great indicator of our marine environment. And these pictures like this float around a lot of these seabird chicks that eat a lot of plastic and then as a result kind of die. But we can also find seabirds in plastics closer to home. This is a albatross chick from the middle of the Pacific, yet here on the East Coast and in the Gulf of Mexico and on the Pacific coast of the US, we can also encounter this problem. It's not just kind of a middle of the Pacific problem. So here on the US East Coast, I study this group of birds called shearwaters. And shearwaters live entirely at sea. They very rarely come to land. They only come to land to lay eggs and take care of their chicks. So they're really well suited to live in the ocean environment. They can dive for food and chase fish. And then they also scavenge at the surface of the water on any kind of fish or zooplankton that they can pick up. But because they kind of hang out at the surface of the ocean, that means that they're really prone to eating any plastics that are floating on top of the ocean surface. And so we care about this because if we see chemicals and different pollutants in seabirds, we know that these are stressors in our ocean environment because seabirds are a lot like us. I know they don't look a lot like us, but they are a lot like us because they live a long time. They live all over the globe. They respond to changes and stressors in their environment. So that means if we take the food away from their environment, they're going to respond really quickly in terms of their health and then their population numbers. And so that means we use them as an indicator of their environment. There's also kind of a famous phrase called the canary in the coal mine. And that's because birds have fast metabolism similar to us. So they respond to pollutants like chemicals or different plastics pretty quickly. And so we can, when we measure them and see how they're doing with these different stressors, we get an indication of how that looks in our food web and how that can impact us as well, because they're sensitive creatures. So I specifically get my shearwater birds from off the elbow of Cape Cod. Does anyone know where Cape Cod is? Could I get a show of hands? I can see some classrooms up there. Cool, great. So I get most of my birds, they drown off the coast of Cape Cod, and then I use those already dead individuals for this analysis that I'm doing to look into chemicals and plastics. This is part of a research program at Stellwagen National Marine Sanctuary. That's one of 14 national marine sanctuaries that we have here in the US. And the system protects really important biological resources as well as cultural resources kind of throughout the country. And I'm fortunate enough to work with this specific site that helps me get these dead seabird individuals. So we track them all over the region. These are satellite points. If anyone has Twitter, we have a Twitter feed at Tract Seabirds where we track some of the live birds that we catch, and we figure out where they're hanging out in the area. And from there, we can kind of figure out what they're feeding on, what their relationship is to whales in the area, and then also where they could be getting some of these chemicals and plastics that I then measure from some of the dead individuals. So when we looked into this previously, we found that about 70% of these birds had plastics in them. My most recent work suggests that it's about 95% of these birds have plastic pieces in them, which is really, really scary, because that means since the early 2000s, the amount of plastic that is in seabirds off the Atlantic coast has increased. So I'm going to switch away from the slides and now start talking you through an actual seabird necropsy. So this will take me a second to get set up and get you in position. Okay.
While you're doing that, I just want to say what a fantastic presentation that was. That was really neat.
Thank you. All right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to cut up this seabird. I'm putting on personal protective equipment. It's really important that when you deal with live or dead animals, you take precautions to make sure you're not exposed to any bacteria or viruses they have. So I'm going to put that on, and I know that this could be a little bit, there's going to be some blood, and so I'm going to keep the camera at a slight distance from the bird, and I'm going to pick things up and announce that I'm going to show them to you. And so if you are a little squeamish or you don't really want to see it, don't worry about it. You can just turn your eyes away. You won't see anything too close or too squishy as I'm kind of cutting up this bird. So here we are. And Jesse, if you wouldn't mind helping me keep a track on time, I'm not going to be able to keep an eye on my watch as much while I'm doing this.
Will do.
Okay, so we have a city shearwater. This is a type of shearwater that lives in the Gulf of Maine, has really, really long wings for this bird. They're really good at flying with very little flaps of their wings and just kind of using ocean currents. This bird drowned and then came in through an observer program that counts the number of things that get caught in fishermen's nets. So first of all, we take an outside look at this bird. We want to know, okay, did it break any wings? We feel around on wings, we check in its mouth, see if there's anything crazy in there. We check its feet, see if there's any, the feet are kind of dry, so we'll take a note of that.
Anna, sorry, give me 2 seconds. For whatever reason, we've got your slide still on the screen rather than you. I have your seabird dissection happening on the screen, but no one else seems to.
Oh, okay, thank you. Let me see if I can do anything about that.
All right.
Oh yeah, I can. Cool. Can you see me now?
Let me get, one of the teachers. So Miss Reeves' class, can you guys see the seabird now?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, good. Sorry for that, everyone. Go ahead.
Okay, let me start over. I'm so sorry about that, everyone. All right, so this is a sooty shearwater. This is a species of shearwater that hangs out in Massachusetts Bay and the Gulf of Maine, kind of that area I showed you on my slides. And this is a seabird that has really long wings because they don't flap a lot. They really use a lot of the atmospheric currents and winds at sea to kind of soar. They don't really use a lot of energy flying. They have a tube nose. They're called proceliform seabirds. They have these tubes at the front of their nose that act as nostrils. And so that's something pretty distinctive about shearwaters. This is a cousin to my main study species, the great shearwater. And so we still look at this species when we get dead individuals of this kind as well, because they're still important. It's in the same family that I'm looking at. We can still get a lot of information. So to start this necropsy, let me bring you a little bit closer. Okay, great. So to start this necropsy, we take a look at the outside of the individual. We're looking in the mouth, kind of just to see if there's anything in there. We're looking at the wings, seeing if anything is broken here. We're checking out the legs, seeing if the legs are broken as well. This bird looks pretty healthy. From there, we're gonna go ahead and cut into this bird. And like I said, I'm gonna announce before I show you anything too bloody. Otherwise, you're gonna kind of get a side view of this while I'm talking through it. So hopefully no one is surprised or anything like that. So the first thing we do is we make a line down the bird. We use a little bit of Dawn that's in water. That helps us part the feathers so that we can get in there and make a cut. And from there, we just cut right in. Ooh, cool. All right. So the first thing I notice when I'm cutting into this bird, let me make it a little bit more apparent for you all, is how fat the bird is. Because how fat the bird is tells me something about what kind of food resources are available to this bird and the rest of the ecosystem in Massachusetts Bay. It tells us how healthy and how much food there is to feed everyone who's using that system. So let's get this opened up.
While you're doing that, it's really interesting how effortless the knife is. That's a really...
Yeah. So I'm using a medical scalpel. I want to reiterate, don't try this at home. The tools I use are very sharp, and there's a lot of viruses and bacteria that can be in wild animals. So I've received a lot of training about how to do this and stay safe. So we're inside the bird. I'm going to flip it towards everyone so you can see kind of what that looks like. If you don't want to see blood, don't look right now. So this is what it looks like when we open that up. So right here, this is the keel of the bird. We have its muscle over here, and then over here, this is that fat layer I'm talking about. It's on the inside of its chest cavity. And when I see this, this looks like a really healthy bird. It has a lot of fat deposits on it. So that means that the amount of food in the system in Massachusetts Bay, that's great. That means it's healthy. So from there, I'm gonna go ahead and I take a sample for a muscle sample, and I screen this little piece of muscle for stable isotopes. That's a type of scientific analysis that lets me know kind of what sorts of things the bird is eating. From there, I'm gonna go a little bit further into the chest cavity. All right. So there's going to be a crunch. This is going to sound a little gross. I'm cracking open its rib cage. You can do this a little bit more delicately, but I can't find my scissors at this moment. All right, so now we are in here. We're inside the bird. And so the rib cage is flipped up. I'm gonna flip the bird towards you so everyone can see. So I flipped up the rib cage. The rib cage is up here. I have a heart right here. I have a liver, and then I have a bunch more fat. That means, again, that this bird is healthy. It's eating all kinds of good things in that system. That's a really good sign. So because I want to look at chemicals and plastics, I go ahead and I also take the liver. The liver is kind of like a filter in a lot of vertebrate animals or animals with backbones like us. And so it kind of filters everything out that we don't really want in our systems. And so if you're looking for chemical pollutants, this is a great place to start. So the liver is pretty small. I'm going to turn this towards everyone again. The liver is pretty small. It kind of, you know, it's just pretty wet, moves back and forth really easily. I take this and then I freeze dry it and I subject it to a bunch of different chemical techniques, and I measure the amount of different chemicals that we create that get into the environment and then get into this bird. So I'm going to set that aside, and that will be something I'll look at later. So from there, I'm going to go back to my individual here, and I want to take out the GI tract. Oh, you know what? I also want to make sure I know the age of this bird and its sex. And so you can do that by looking for its reproductive organs. They're always at the back of the bird. Let's see if we have any in here. Some of the really young birds, they don't really have any well-developed reproductive organs, so it's hard to tell. Oh, but we do. We have, this is a very young male bird. You're not going to be able to see this because it's very tiny. I'm going to flip it towards you anyway, just in case anyone who doesn't want to see it, look away. So towards this back of this bird, we have kidneys. It's going to be really tough to see again. We have kidneys that are at the very back of the bird, and then directly above the kidneys, that's where its reproductive organs hang out. And so I look for that, and I can say that this is a young male bird, which is good to know. It's important to know. So from there, I'm going to go ahead and take out this GI tract.
While you're doing that, just really briefly for the classes that might not know, what is a GI tract?
That is the gastrointestinal tract, excuse me. That's like your stomach system. Thank you. That's a great reminder, Jesse. So that's your stomach system that starts from the very top of your throat, goes all the way down to your butt. And so we want to take that out and look for plastics in it. So I'm doing that right now. It takes just a second. You don't want to cut into it because that will just kind of fill guts everywhere, and that's not really what I want. Okay, got the top out. Cool. All right, and here's the bottom. So I'm going to bring this towards you. It might be a little gory, just so you guys are aware. This is the whole GI tract, or the whole stomach and intestinal system of the bird. So up here, this top portion, this is called the proventriculus. And this is it's like a balloon. It spreads out, it gets huge with the amount of fish or squid that the bird is eating, and it can fit a lot of things. Everything gets digested up here. I'm going to take off some of this fat because it's kind of hard to see. This is a really fat bird, which is great. Good to know. Okay, so after this top part, this stretchy part, there is a part down here which I really want you to see because this is important for plastic. Get all this fat off of here. Oh my word, this is definitely a fat bird. That's great. Okay, so at the bottom I showed you this balloon, and now right here, this little thing right here, this is called the ventriculus, or the gizzard of the bird. And this little organ, I'm going to cut it open so you can see. Actually, let me get a little bit more stuff off of there. This little organ is responsible for grinding up the hard parts that get into the bird. And so naturally, the bird would be eating squid and fish, and so this little organ is really muscular and hard, and so it would use this spot to digest and grind up all those hard parts that are in the bird. But this is also where we find most of the plastics in a bird. Not a lot accumulates in this kind of balloon stretchy part. It all accumulates in this tiny little piece right here. And this is something that's kind of specific to shearwaters because a lot of seabirds throw up a lot. Seabirds don't, or excuse me, shearwaters don't throw up as much as maybe like an albatross or a fulmar. And so a lot of their plastics will just come into this little organ and stay there. And so below that organ, these are the small and large intestines. And this is where a lot of the digestion and nutrient uptake occurs. We're not going to look at that here today, but let me cut into this gizzard and see if we have any plastics. All right, so we're in the gizzard. Yep, plastic. So I'm gonna cut off the other portion so I can just bring this gizzard portion a little bit closer to the camera for everyone. And we'll rinse that out. Let me grab a beaker so we can rinse it into a beaker for everyone. Okay, so this is about as close as I can probably get. So inside this gizzard, you might be able to see like some black dots. Some of those black dots are squid beaks. Some of those black dots are pieces of plastic, and you can tell because there's some blue pieces in here. Let me see how much closer I can get.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, cool. So yeah, there's a big blue piece of plastic in there, in addition to some black squid beaks. And so I'm gonna grab a beaker and rinse this in, and so we'll be able to see it a little bit more clearly.
Outstanding. So while you're doing that, Anna, if you can see all the classes, the reactions are fantastic. Again, this is something that none of these kids will get a chance to do till high school, so at least 4 or 5 years from now. This is a really unique opportunity. And you guys, I know,
I'm so glad you could join me. I know it seems a little bit gross, but we get so much information from doing this that it, like I was kind of squeamish about it myself at first, but then when I realized how much I was learning, now I just love it. This is my favorite thing to do. Okay, so I'm rinsing out that little gizzard into a dish to show everyone what's going on. All right, let me drain the dish a little bit.
you're doing great for time, by the way. We still got another 5 or so minutes if you want to keep going. And perfect.
Okay, so this is what just came out of our sample that we did together. And I'm gonna put my gloves behind it so hopefully you can see a little bit more. I'm gonna bring that a little bit even closer in up here where I'm kind of pointing towards. There's a blue dot, that's a big piece of plastic. There's another kind of greeny blue dot, maybe in the middle of the dish, that's another piece of plastic. There's also a white piece in there let me see where it is. Let me grab oh, hey, this would have been a better idea. Sorry, everyone. Just pick them up and show you. And I can tell they're plastic. So this is a piece of plastic right here. This is a piece of plastic. Ooh, it's kind of slippery. This is another one over here. Come here. There we go. This is another one over here. There we go. And then where's that white one? There's a small white, oh, here we go. No, that's not it. Oh, this is plastic. Here's a small black piece as well. And so I know these are plastic really quickly. We also do some chemical analyses, but guess what? Plastic floats. So I just rinse that gizzard out into just water. And so when I'm looking at these, the plastic floats where the bone pieces, they sink. And so let me show you some of our samples once they're processed. Right here. So these are some samples that I work on with my research assistant, Gwen. So this is from a great Shearwater. I'm gonna bring this kind of close to the camera so everyone can see. That's a big ball of microfiber in the bottom of your screen that came out of a gizzard of another young bird. And then these are a bunch of pieces of bottle caps that again came out of that same little organ from a great Shearwater. This is a bunch of squid beaks. This is kind of like what should naturally be in that organ. It's all just little beaks of the squid that we can count and say how many squid they ate. But in addition, we also find plastic pieces. This is some pieces of like a plastic bag that's been degraded a bunch. And then, yeah, I think I showed you everything. Let me show you this microfiber piece a little bit closer too. So that's kind of like a really neat piece. We don't always see balls of microfiber like that. So this was a really interesting sample to collect. So with that, after I kind of take more samples from this particular bird, I'm gonna go back and grab some of this fat and wrap it up. Sorry, I'm trying to like get in the frame, I'm too tall. I'm gonna go back and take some different other samples from this bird. And then from there, we go on to count the number of plastics, measure them, and then measure what type of plastic that we find. So far we found every bird has about 3 to 7 pieces. That's kind of the average we've seen so far. And unfortunately, chemical analysis tells us that 90% of the plastic pieces we find are from recyclable products. They're mostly from polyethylene things and polyethylene floats. And so it's mostly recyclable things that we're finding these birds are eating, which is really, really sad. I'm trying to think what else I need to tell you guys. I think in terms of the necropsy, that's probably all I want to say. I want to start taking questions at this point. After this, I'll also make sure to do a really good job of cleaning up. I want to emphasize that working with wildlife, you don't want to do it unless you have the proper training for it. So I'm going to do a really nice job of cleaning up this area, making sure there's nothing else that could get anyone else sick or harm anyone else here in this area. So with that, let me take off my gloves and come back around and I'll start answering questions.
Outstanding. Well, thank you so much, Anna. Again, that was a really unique opportunity for the kids. So thank you. That was marvelous and really fast, unexpectedly fast. It was great. And we like the chance to see some of the plastics from the other birds too. That was fantastic. All right. So let's dive in. I'm going to take a lot of live questions, of course. We've also got a bunch of groups watching on YouTube Live. So if you guys want to type in your questions in the chat bar on the right, I'll happily pass them on. But let's start with Miss Brady's class. If you guys want to come up, kick us off. Hey.
Hey.
So when you dissect a bird and then you find plastic, what do you do with that plastic?
Oh, go ahead, sorry.
Do you take it, if it's recyclable, do you take it to a recycling center or do you keep it?
So right now I'm keeping it all. I'm using it, I take these pieces of plastic like this. I take these pieces and I do another chemical analysis on them to figure out what type of plastic we have. And then after that, we save them because someone else can probably use these samples for another kind of project. And so we're not throwing them away. Actually, let me show you what that looks like. Okay, sorry, I'm back. So we take them, we put them in envelopes that look like this, and we put them in a small plastic baggie, and then we save them. They stay kind of as long as we are still working with that data, so that someone else could use them, or we can go back and check anything that we need to. But that's a good question, for sure, about recycling. Thank you.
All right, Miss Skinner's class, if you guys have one, come on up.
Are birds eating the plastic themselves, or are they eating fish that have eaten microplastics?
That's a really great question. Thank you so much. So it's a range of answers there. It depends on the size of the plastic. So I'm going to show this sample again. These are really big pieces of plastic. Some of these are maybe a centimeter, or what would that be? Maybe a quarter of an inch. So these are large pieces of plastic. The fish that the birds eat are a little bit too small to keep this in their system. So the birds are probably eating a lot of these pieces directly. This microfiber sample, it looks like a kind of a large ball right there, but this is because a lot of them have gotten caught together. But microfibers are really small. And so that could be something that the fish are eating and then the bird is eating the fish. We're not exactly sure about that, but that's a really great question. So long story short, it depends on the size of the plastic.
Yeah, great question. Glad we got that. Miss Lovin's class. So Miss Lovin's from Shearwater, Arkansas. They said their computer went crazy, which I like to take literally and think of it running across the room, but they are able to join us on YouTube. And so their first question, which I think a lot of people might have had, is, did the birds smell? Like, what happens when you're doing this dissection? Is it a—
Oh, no. So, all right, I'm going to offer a disclaimer. The birds smell a very particular kind of scent. It's kind of a scent that's kind of a mix of like ocean smell and then maybe like a little bit of like plankton, algae smell. The guts themselves, they don't really smell. The birds have been frozen up until this point, and so it's not like anything too gross, but they smell a little bit like musty ocean-ish. And I have to tell you all, and this will be kind of our secret, I love the way they smell. They smell really, really, really interesting.
That's awesome. Our secret live on YouTube. All right, that's fantastic. Let's go to Miss Reed's class. If you guys have one, come on up. Oh, your audio is not working. I don't know why. Because you're demuted. but we can't hear you right now. I don't know if there's something with the computer. Maybe a little closer. Yeah, try that. No, still nothing, my dear. So what we'll do, okay, we'll come back to you guys in a second, fiddle with it, and then worst case, if you have to type in your question, we can take it that way. That's worst case. But right now, I'll go to Mr. Allen's class. You guys want to come up? Go for it, and I'll come right back.
Why isn't the plastic good for seabirds?
Wait, I didn't quite catch that. Can you say it one more time?
Why isn't the plastic good for seabirds?
Oh, that's a great question. Thank you. I should have said that from the very beginning. So it's not good for them for a lot of different reasons. So number one, this, I think I showed you this organ. Let me pull it up over here again. So this organ is small. This is really, really small. And so it needs this organ to be functioning and kind of in a normal way to crunch up all of the squid and bones that it's dealing with. And so when there's a bunch of plastic in there, it has a hard time digesting the natural food items it needs to digest. And so it can get so packed in that little organ I showed you, as well as the flexible stomach portion, that the bird can't fit any natural food in it. And so that can end up meaning that the bird starves to death because it's so full of plastic, it can't digest any natural food items. The plastic can also bring some chemicals along with it that can hurt the bird that way, can really kind of poison the bird in some senses. And then as well, some of the plastic pieces are really sharp. And so when they're in there, they can cut up the bird and harm it in that way as well. So kind of physical and chemical, it can really stress the bird out.
Yeah, it's really not a good thing. Just like we wouldn't want to eat plastic, neither does the bird. It just doesn't necessarily have the choice when it's skimming things off the top. All right, Miss Gill's class, and then we'll come back to Miss Reeves, and we'll check in 2 seconds. We'll start with Miss Gill. You guys have a question? Come on up.
What got you into studying these water animals?
Oh, that's a great question. So I've always loved the ocean. I studied marine biology and chemistry from my first period of college as an undergrad. And I was just really fascinated with how these animals can live in such a really intense environment. The open ocean is, you have to really search very hard for food. There's a lot of other things that are trying to eat you. I just was so fascinated with kind of the whole system. And then I've always really liked chemistry. And so it seems kind of a natural fit to be fascinated with seabirds and then want to kind of combine chemistry and plastic analysis as well. So I think if you ask my mom would tell you when I was like 3, I would only pretend to be the Little Mermaid. I wore Little Mermaid clothes. I think an ocean career was kind of inevitable for me.
Yeah, well, your passion shines through. It's fantastic. We do a lot of these, and it's really outstanding. So thank you so much. All right, let's go back to Ms. Reeves' class. See if you guys have a question. See if we got the mic working. Fingers crossed. You should be good.
Hi, my name's Selena. What type of bird had the most plastic in it?
Great.
So that's a great question. Thank you. It kind of depends on where you are. A lot of the birds that live in the open ocean, they seem to pick up some of the most plastic. So shearwaters are not a bird that you see if you're kind of hanging out at the beach. We call them pelagics or open ocean birds. And so a lot of them seem to get the most plastic because, like I said, the open ocean it's big, it's blue, it's hard to find food. These birds are seeing anything that could be kind of a weird color or shape, and they're going over to investigate and grabbing those plastic pieces. And so a lot of those open ocean birds end up with the most plastic. The most plastic I've ever found in a bird was 105 pieces in that organ that were packed in there so tightly that the organ exploded, and that's what actually killed the bird. So I think albatross, shearwaters, fulmars, those type of birds, they're in the Proceliform family, it's called. They're really, really prone to plastic ingestion.
Yeah.
Great question.
This is a really interesting session because, I mean, we've been doing marine plastics all month, but with the dissection and with you showing us, again, literally by fluke, one bird happened to have a bunch of plastic and you get this average and it can sometimes kill the bird. It's a really fantastic reminder of what this can actually do as an issue. It's not.
Yeah. And I guess I want to point something out. It's not necessarily a fluke. I've only found it's really, really rare for me to find a bird that doesn't have plastic in it. Yeah. We're thinking it's about 95% of birds have plastic in them in our area, again, off the US East Coast. And so I was expecting to find plastics to show you all today, which is really unfortunate. And I also want to make sure to remind you guys, you know, this right here, this is from one of our samples. This is a bottle cap, and I can tell because it has kind of all of the ridges on it and like different, you know, signs that it's a bottle cap. But when we put those bottle caps into the environment, they don't stay looking like bottle caps. The bird can't see that and be like, oh, that's huge. That's a bottle cap. That belongs in a soda, not in my stomach. They see little pieces like this and don't know what they are and think, hey, that could be food. And so then I see the tail end of this once they're already dead. And this is what it looks like in the environment. So you have to remember that your plastics don't stay looking like plastics. At some point, they start looking like food for animals.
Yeah, outstanding. All right, let's dive back to a second round of questions. Miss Brady's class, if you want to kick us off, come on up.
Question. Ethan, go ahead. There, walk up there. We're coming.
Cool.
All right, right there, buddy. Look at the camera.
Have you ever dissected any other animal? Like
Yeah.
birds
Wait, sorry, I didn't catch the end of that. What did you say?
besides seabirds?
So I've done, what have I done? I've done a lot of fish. I do a lot of fish, and I've done a turtle. I am not really a mammal person. There, in the lab I work, there are some seals and whales and dolphins that they work with, but they are really smelly. I will be honest and say they smell awful. And so I've never really gotten into that. So mostly fish and birds.
That's funny. Actually, it's worth noting, you mentioned fish earlier. One of our sessions earlier this month mentioned that every single fish that they find in Lake Ontario now has plastic in it of some kind. So all the birds they find, all the fish, like this is not a small issue. This is a big deal, people. Yeah. All right, let's go to Miss Skinner's class. If you guys have a second question, go for it.
How many birds die each year because of plastic pollution?
That's a great question. And I have to be honest and say, I don't know. I don't think we have a great idea of how many die each year from plastic pollution. I think it depends on the species and the location. A lot of albatross chicks in the Pacific have a problem with this, where the parents feed them so much plastic, they can't eat anything else, and so they starve to death. I think the number kind of varies, and I'm really not sure.
Yeah. All right. We've got 2 questions online from Ms. Lovin's group, so I wanted to pass along. What happens to the bird after the dissection?
So that's a really good question. As I mentioned, I'm going to go back and take some of the tissues. Typically, this takes me about 30 minutes per bird, kind of rush through it to make sure we could see everything today. But I take down a lot of information as I'm going through this process because I want to know its age, its sex, how big it is. And then I take a bunch of these tissues, I package them up, I freeze those tissues until I'm ready to deal with them for chemical analysis. And then the bird itself goes into biohazard waste. It is not necessarily a biohazard, but it is not something that we want kind of hanging out where someone else could get into it or an animal could get into it. It's better to be safe than sorry when you're dealing with wildlife.
Yeah. And then throughout your presentation, you were waxing mystical about how fat the bird was, how nice it looked. Is there a way to tell what an unhealthy bird would look like?
Yeah, so I'm gonna reach over and grab this piece of fat. So if you don't want to see blood, turn away for a second. So this is the fat that came off of the bird. Woo! Good thing I was holding that. So this is the fat that came off of this bird. It's just like a huge chunk of fat. This is probably 10 to 15 grams of fat. If the bird is unhealthy, it just wouldn't have that. It would be really skinny. It would feel more like a thin sheet instead of that big chunk. And so I'm going to go back and take a measurement of how thick that piece of fat is, and we write that down, and then that can kind of give us an estimate, like a number estimate of how fat the bird is compared to all the other ones. But normally, or I wouldn't say normally, the healthy ones do have fat reserves like that. The unhealthy ones just don't have any. There's really nothing to pick up and show you.
Yeah, outstanding. All right, and then we'll wrap up with our last 3 questions. Ms. Reeves' class, if you guys want to come up again, go for it.
Hi, I'm Haley, and I would like to ask, how many plastics can a bird eat before it dies?
That's a really good question. It depends on the size of the bird and how big that organ is I showed you. Where'd it go? So this is really, really small. I'm going to show it again. This is really, really small. So however many plastic it takes to fill this up to the point that it bursts. And so from my experience, that's about 105 pieces of plastic. For different species that have different size gizzards, that can be totally different. And then I think I also said this, some of the plastic pieces are kind of sharp. And so that stretchy portion, the balloon portion of the stomach, that can get cut up really easily, and that could also kill the bird. So it kind of depends. I think some recent research says that even just 1 or 2 pieces of plastic drastically increases the chance that a bird could die from that. So it's really not good that we're finding so many pieces of plastic in the birds.
Yeah. Great question. And also you touched upon a few times in some of your answers, the fact that, there's so much more to learn. We're still researching this, and marine plastics as an issue is one that all month long has been highlighted. Like there's a lot more work to be done. We know it's bad. We're finding out how bad it is and what we can do to stop it. So I'm really glad we touched upon that. All right, Mr. Allen's class, if you guys have another one. Go for it.
How did the bird you dissect die?
So they drown. Sometimes when you're out at sea, or excuse me, when you're fishing out at sea, there are ways that birds can get caught when you're trying to catch other species. And so they'll get caught in those nets and drown. And instead of them going to waste, we use them for science. And so it's not necessarily ideal for the bird, but we get a lot of information that way. So it wasn't killed on purpose. I kind of get them opportunistically from them drowning in other kind of nets.
Yeah. Before we wrap up with a last question from our class, I want to ask, you just mentioned it a little bit, but why dissect? Like what kind of information can you get? Why is it so important to do the work that you're doing?
So I'm highly biased, but I think necropsies or dissections are one of the most important ways to learn about an individual health and then the health of the total population or the total community. And so I can learn, I measure how fat the bird is. That tells me how much food is in the area that the bird is living in. I learn about how big the bird is. That tells me, again, how healthy the bird is. It also tells me a little bit about how these birds grow and change over time. I get to learn about the age and sex of the bird. And so that helps us understand that young birds hang out in some areas, older birds hang out in other areas. A lot of seabirds, they don't have any differences between them, between age and sex. And so it's really hard to tell how old a bird is by just looking at it from the outside. We also do a number of chemical analyses on the tissues that tells us exactly what it's been eating, close to a species level. We can also then learn about what kind of chemicals are in it, which you can't do by just looking at it. What else? We also get an idea of how fit it is to migrate. These birds migrate to the South Atlantic every year. And so by kind of combining some of these lines of information, we know how healthy it is and if it can make that migration. And so it's a lot of different information that's usable by a lot of different researchers. There's, I think, close to 10 people who work with me on this project. Everyone gets a lot of information. That was an outstanding description. You've almost practiced that. That was great. We'll wrap up with one last question from Miss Gill's class. Come on up, guys. Hey, man.
Can you tell us about other animals you found microplastics in?
Oh, wait, I didn't quite hear you. Could you say that one more time?
Can you tell us about other animals that you found microplastics in?
Sure. So I'll be honest and say I've only really looked in birds and fish. So I can't really talk about anything beyond birds and fish firsthand. I'll say again that pretty much every bird I have cut up has plastics in it. Most of them are this size, and they're kind of weird shapes and sizes that you wouldn't really recognize them as plastic. The fish I've cut up, they're much smaller pieces. Again, they're kind of microfiber-ish. They're really tiny because the fish I cut up are about that big. They're pretty small fish. I know that other scientists look into plastics in all sorts of creatures, and plastics have been found in sharks and whales. Some whales have been thought to strand or die because of the amount of plastics that they have in their stomachs. Dolphins as well. What else? Seals, turtles, all of these creatures are also eating plastics. I can't tell you firsthand what that looks like. I can really only talk about birds, but yeah, birds are a great indicator for what's there. And I'm maybe a little bit biased about how important I think those results are. I also, as I said, birds don't smell like some of the other creatures. A lot of the bigger creatures you get, they just smell worse and worse and worse. And so I like cutting up birds. Sorry, that might not answer the total of your question, but that's what I got for you.
It's fantastic. Before we wrap up, Anna, I always like to ask, where can kids learn more and what can they do? So with marine plastics, it's an issue that people can actually do something about. So if you're going to guide people to do one thing, what would that be?
I would tell you to reduce the amount of plastic that you use in your daily life. Recycling is also excellent, but some of our recycling, as I said, 90% of the plastics I find in the birds are recyclable. So sometimes, you need to recycle, but you also need to reduce in the first place so that more plastic products are not produced. I would say that's the number one thing you can do. Besides for that, I would also tell your parents about this. Tell other kids, tell other folks about this plastic problem, because you are some of the most the most important communicators about this issue. You're going to inherit this planet and the resources that are on it. And so these are your resources to protect. And so I encourage you to spread the word about this. Your parents are going to listen. Adults are going to listen. Sometimes adults get really just caught up in all the other adult things we have to do. But when you take a stand and use your voice about this, you're some of the best communicators about that problem. So please don't be shy. Spread the word about this issue.
Outstanding. I mean, all you guys need to do as students is look at what the climate strikes are happening all around the world to see that there's a real impact to being, aware and sharing that message. So fantastic end to the presentation, Anna. What we do at the end of every one of these presentations, I'm going to demute every class's microphone. So Miss Reed, Miss Skinner, Miss Brady, Miss Gill, Mr. Allen, you guys are all demuted. If you could join me in saying a big thank you to Anna for joining us today, go for it. Awesome, guys. All right, so yes, we've got many more sessions the rest of the month, an amazing October coming up. Anna, thank you so much for joining us. That was fantastic.
Thank you so much for having me, everyone. I really love talking to you.